Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees, which brings together diverse and unique voices from around the world to share their stories. If you liked today's episode, remember to give us a like, subscribe, and leave a review. Here's your host, David Shunk.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees. I am here with Monica Hall, who is an adoptee and birth parent. So we have the privilege to speak with her. We've been trying to arrange this for about 6 months to a year, and our schedules finally aligned, and we are now doing this. So it's going to be a good, fun episode, and I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, Monica, welcome. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me and finally connecting with you, which is almost a surprise because it's taken so long. But so I live in Sacramento. I'm an adoptee. I was adopted out of Canada, out of a foster home with about 10 other babies. And I was raised in Anchorage, Alaska, because that's where my parents had been living. And that's where a lot of the trauma that happened in my life that caused me to write a memoir. It's kind of all happened in Alaska. And, sometimes that kind of stuff just keeps rolling downhill. We moved to California when I was 16, and I'm still in California. And so there's been a long journey being an adoptee and searching finally, and then relinquishing a child for adoption since she went into normal birth mother. And the thing that people ask me, especially adoptees, is being an adoptee, how could you give your own baby up for adoption? I mean,
it's a big question. Yeah. Well,
I get that. But I grew up in a very Catholic home, super religious Catholic home. I'm named after a nun. My first name is Mary. And we went to every holy day. We had nurses. We had nuns. We had priests coming visiting. They'd stay the night. We put them up in Anchorage.
Yep.
We'd take them out shopping. I mean, that's how I grew up. And so my parents were older. They adopted me. My mom was 32. My dad was 42. And they had grown up in the Depression. And, I think they did the best they could, which wasn't great. But, we work with what we got, right? And so,
right.
Yeah. And so my mom, I had, going through the memoir that I just finished, it was really, parts of it were very grueling for me because how I dealt with things, and I guess it's my personality, I push them down, or I just like roll over them like a steamroller and just keep going. And I'm not like the real sensitive type, Thank goodness I'm not. I probably wouldn't be here today if I were. I think I was wired this way. So I grew up in Anchorage. When they brought me to Anchorage, there were wasn't even a state yet. It was a territory for a couple of years, and they're from California. They went up there. People went to Alaska to escape, make something new. There was not a lot of law up there. It was kind of the Wild West. And so you had a lot of that type of personality. I think sort of like people that would come over on the Mayflower, like, we don't like you over in Europe. We're coming somewhere where we can make our own rules. Those kind of people, right? And so my dad was in real estate agent. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and her folks had been very alcoholic. She and her brother hid the knives. She had no supervision. And so what we do as parents sometimes is do the opposite of what we had. So she was very protective. She was a worrier. She was overprotective. And I'm a free spirit, and that didn't work for me. But when I was 3, we went back to Canada and we adopted my adopted brother. And he was a high need. He screamed all the time. He was really thin. My mom he needed her, right? And I didn't appear to need her because I was just the strong little tomboy of a 3-year-old, and didn't want to wear dresses, just wanted to be in the dirt, and tackling the boys at the park and things like that. I was just a tomboy, but I needed her.
Yeah.
I really needed her. And so when my brother came along, I was so jealous of him. There's pictures of me with my fist over his little head when he's barely walking. And my father, he adored me, but not healthy adored me, so to speak. And so, there's so much that I had to unwind writing this memoir. And about 8 years ago, my daughter, who's now 39, she was pregnant with my grandson at the time. She was leaving the house and she says, "Mom, I think you should write a memoir." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "No, you've got such an interesting story. Like, people will be fascinated. You were adopted, and then you gave up the baby for adoption, and then you found your family, and then you found Mary, and it's just fascinating." And to me, it wasn't fascinating because it was a lived life. It was something nothing different from that, right? It was the other stuff that I wanted to write about. It was the stuff that I had flashbacks, and I had missing memories, and I had weird feelings about things that I never, and things that happened didn't sit right with me. And because the way I lived my life, I just kind of just brushed by it. And also, one of the things that I found is that I discovered so much is that I have this built-in, maybe it's part of who I am or came here, was born this way, or maybe it's partly because I was relinquished for adoption. But if I care about you or your family or something, I will forever make excuses for you. I will forever, like my girlfriend said, when I was writing my memoir, she's still in Alaska, I'm here, and she goes, "Monica, you always made excuses for your mom." And that was the hardest thing, is to see things clearly. I just couldn't see things clearly because I love these people, right? So, the last 8 years of writing has been just really hard, and sometimes, and then I take a break for a few months, and then I go back to it. And I hired a developmental editor, and I'd never met her. She's in Wisconsin. I'm in California. She was a former college professor. I'd never written. I cut all through school. I mean, I didn't want to go to school. I had ADD, and I was self-centered and like kind of a wild card, and we really could have used all that education. And so I would send, pieces to her, some of the essays that I was writing, and she'd send them back and say, show, don't tell. What do you mean you felt this? Show me. What does this mean? Why? And she made me dig. And my mom was still alive at the time, and we'd just go, wow, what the heck? Is she a therapist? I mean, the things she was asking, I would never, ever have thought to ask myself. And that's just the way they're trained. The editors are trained that way. And so it cost me a lot of money, at 40 or 45 bucks an hour. I learned how to write, and I was able to dig and dig and dig. And some of that was real dark. It was real dark. Yeah. But on the other side, what's so incredible is that, that girl on the cover, I can feel compassion for that girl on the cover. I have hard time feeling compassion for this one. It's easy for me to look at her and go, that poor thing. She was doing the best she could, because I was a mess. I was a juvenile delinquent. I did a lot of damage, but in the end, after I'm done with this, it's like, I no longer have room for people in my life that aren't good to me. There's something that shifted.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you're gone. You're out. Before I make excuses for them, like I have a mentor, she would say, "Monica, you're like the battered wife. He bloodies your lip, he blacks your eye, and then he brings you flowers and you take him back. And then he does it again, and he says he's sorry and he loves you. And that's the way I've been with people in my life. And something has shifted. And, I'm 60, 6 years old now. You'd think I'd have gotten the memo a long time ago. But, it just takes what it takes. And, for adoptees, we have a lot of trauma. I mean, some have more than others, depending on the kind of family you get or the decisions that I made, that I put myself in places to be hurt, wanting to be loved, wanting to be accepted more than anything, right?
Right.
And so, I take accountability for some of those decisions, but not what was done to me. Though that's not my fault.
Right.
And, the name of my memoir is Practically Still a Virgin. And, I was sneaking out my bedroom window by the time I was 13. And in Alaska, it's, this cotton candy glow of twilight never quite gets dark in the summertime. It's just this beautiful twilight color. And in the winter, it's dark. Like, it's dark. I remember it would get dark about 3:00 in the afternoon when I'm at school, and it would get light about 11 in the morning. So I go to school, and we were on split shift because in Alaska, it was an oil boom. So this was when the oil was discovered in 1968. By 70s, man, everybody's moving to Alaska. You had lots of people that wanted to start new businesses and make money, and you had oil executives, and you had bank managers, and you had the mob, and you had the Hells Angels, and you had human trafficking, and you had, strip clubs, and you had prostitution, and it was just this wild, crazy time. There was no gun laws. I mean, anybody could carry a gun. You didn't have to conceal it. You could conceal it. I mean, it was just an insane time. And that's how I grew up, sneaking out my bedroom window and seeing some things I should never have seen, and experiencing some things that I should never experience. But I just crave freedom. I crave freedom. And my mother didn't let me go places. She wouldn't let me do things because she was protecting me. And all the time she should have been protecting me from my father, but she was wrought with denial. She grew up in this, her survival strategy was denial. So she literally couldn't see things when they were staring her in the face. And that's how she was. I don't know that it was intentional. I feel that she knew some of the things. She was certainly there for some of the physical abuse, and she didn't stop him. So, when I snuck out my bedroom window over and over again, and I was breaking into houses, I was a little juvenile delinquent. I was taking all the drugs of the 70s. I wasn't an addict yet. If I was addicted to anything, it was to breaking into houses, because that was really fun. That was my first addiction. Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
I mean, that sounds like an adrenaline rush right there. Yeah.
I think that's what it was. I'm an enjoyer.
That instant satisfaction.
Instant gratification.
Almost, yeah.
I mean, it was my first addiction. And it was because it made me feel. I always wanted to feel. And I grew up with trauma, and I think that was what I was used to. So even at work today, my job, I'm like, put things off to the last minute so I can just pound through. Let's go. And I get them done, and I feel alive because I'm really, it's the same. And who knows? Maybe that's the way I was wired. Maybe it's because of the abuse and trauma that I suffered. Who knows? But, I don't regret any, I mean, I feel shame and remorse for the people that I hurt. I was a juvenile. I beat people up too. I was a bully. I was like 5'2", 103 pounds. And all I did was pick on people and bully them and beat them up. I was strong. And I think there was I post on Facebook, and a lot of people from Alaska are on there. It's a special place, especially if you were there during those times. It's very special. And I had posted something about the book coming up, and one woman commented, "Does it include beatings and bullying?" And I thought,
wow.
I'd probably beat her up. Yeah.
Jeez.
I mean, so I think that's part of the reason I needed to write this too, is that I needed to understand why I did that stuff. Why would I do those things? those horrible things that I did. Why? And I know why now. I went through all of that, and I can see why I did that, and I forgive her. I forgive her today. And, I've made the amends that best I can, So at 15, I stuck out my bedroom window and I got raped as a virgin by a heroin addict, and somebody that I had known who, he was 4 years older than me and knew I was a virgin. Evidently that was what he wanted. And I didn't tell anybody. I felt such shame. I thought it was my fault. I didn't get beat up and a bloody lip. All those things that that I'd read, that's what we thought rape was when we were, especially, I think society still thinks those things, Oh, she was asking for it. Oh, she had a short skirt or whatever. I just snuck out my bedroom window and went on a motorcycle ride thinking that I was going to get to hang out with some cool people. That was what I was told. Now, a guy got on a motorcycle with another dude, an older dude, and said, "Hey, we're going to go party. You want to hang out with us?" And he gets raped. Is it his fault? So weird. So weird. So anyway, I didn't tell anybody. I was, my family was so religious, and virginity was this, big deal in our family. And my father, would tell my brother and I over and over again, "Your mother was a saint." I couldn't even get in the sack till we were married. He married her at 15. She was 15 for 2 weeks when he found her. He was 25. And he was telling my brother and I these things when we were 10, 11, 8. And so there was this really weird dynamic going on in my family. And I go through it in much more detail and other things in my book that I just had to figure out. So I turned up pregnant. And when they found out, they berated me, like, who was it? And I wouldn't say. I was humiliated. I would have been the stupid narc that got this guy in trouble. I would have been, all these things. I would have been humiliated, and it probably would have been bad. Anyway, his father was a head of a violent crime unit in Anchorage. I guess he was a cop, and so he got his son out of trouble before. So it would have been bad anyway. And being Catholic, there's not a choice. You just put your kid in the house and you close the door and you don't let anybody see her. It was back in the 70s. And and there was still shame around all that then, And my friends that knew about it, nobody knew that I was raped. I didn't tell anybody, and they didn't really come around much because I wasn't fun anymore, And I was now a sophomore in high school. I had changed my ways after the rape. Our junior, we were on split shifts up there because there was so many people moving in. So my ninth grade was in junior high, and my first year of high school was my sophomore year, and that's shortly thereafter is when they, found I was pregnant. And so it was a long, dark 6 months, and there was never a conversation of what to do about it. It was just assumed that I'd give up my baby for adoption. And I think maybe because adoption was normalized in my family, because we were Catholic, it was just never a conversation. She took me to see a nun, and I counseled with this nun. She was a social worker, and she was also going to place my baby for adoption. So I never told her anything, what was going on at home, or what had gone on at home, or how I felt shame and how no nice boys were ever going to want to date me, and that I was going to miss my baby because she was the only, or he was the only known blood relative, my only identity to family, right? And so during that time, I went to a Catholic, or not a Catholic, but a school for pregnant girls during the week. And we were all unwed mothers, and it was down some dark room, and they had the adoption agency, the state adoption agency came to talk to us. And afterwards I went up and I said, I'm adopted, and she said, and I said, my parents don't know anything about my family, who my other family is. because they'd never said anything to me about it. So I assumed they didn't know. And I went home and I told my mom, and she got really emotional, started crying, and I didn't know why she was crying at the time, but she said there are some papers in the safe deposit box that have your other name on it. And I asked her, I don't know, she died 4 years ago. I asked her when I started writing, I said, why did you cry? And she says, because I felt, I knew that because I got to love you, your other mother didn't, and, so it's not just difficult for the adoptee or the birth parents. It's difficult for the adoptive parents too, And so,
yeah, well, it's the unknown that scares them in some way. I mean, a lot of adoptees, when they go and try to have a reunion with their birth families, usually their adoptive parents don't really know what to say half the time, and you can't blame them because they don't know how you're going to respond and to the birth family. They want to make sure you're still safe. They want to make sure you're not hurt. And I interviewed my adoptive mom, and she told me, I think during the interview or many other times as well, from her point of view, it was always to make sure that I was like emotionally sound and I was safe, and always to make sure that I, knew that they loved me, no matter what. So I know, like, when I went back to Russia, it was kind of a unknown moment for my adoptive parents as well. But, my adoptive mom said, this is your trip. This is your experience. This is your time to figure out who you are. And I will be here if you need me. If you don't want me, I'll stay in the hotel room, not say a word. But if you need me, I'm here to cry on or whatever. So it was an emotional experience, but it bonded us forever. I mean, that was something that you can't even you probably couldn't make a movie about it if you tried. I don't think, I mean, you could try, but just living the moment, yeah. Anyway, but I'm just saying, I understand what your adoptive mom was thinking at the time, and it makes sense. I feel like she was worried a little bit, just in a nice way. And also, like you said, you have someone else out there that never got to love you the way I did. And
she felt bad for
yeah.
her, compassion. And
Right,
at the time,
right.
I thought maybe it was because she was worried, that I would learn something other than, about another mother. But I don't know that that's what it was at the time, but that certainly came up later. And so it was when I was pregnant, when I really, really started thinking even more about my birth mother, because I was writing in a journal. My mother was writing in a journal because we were all locked down in the house. It was winter anyway. My father had cancer. So, we were all worried about him, and it was just a really dark time. And I felt like I could feel her, showing me the way, like, how do you do this? You were so selfless, because I was told she was selfless, that she wanted me to have a mommy and a daddy. That's why she wanted me to have a really good home, and that's why she relinquished me. Of course, we called it giving up for adoption back then. And so and she was selfless, so how could I be selfish? It's not like I had a choice anyway, right? But it was a rough one, and there's a number of things that happened during that period of time that were pretty amazing and pretty mind-blowing, and things that were discovered while writing that you just can't make up.
Yeah.
Like I like a total twist. And so anyway, I did relinquish my daughter. They did let me see her because I groomed the nun to let me see her. Mm-hmm. They couldn't, they didn't let you see your baby in the Catholic hospital, but they did in the other hospital. The other girls got to see their baby that I went to school with, and none of them ended up relinquishing. And I got to see my baby, and I did get to hold her and, kiss her and those things. And then we left, and I had to push down the grief. It was imploding. It was something I just said to myself, I just won't think about it right now. I just won't think about it right now, because the grief was so immense that I felt like I was going to die. Like I felt like it was something you couldn't survive. So we moved to the lower 48 another 9 months later, and I start high school again, and I'm in my senior year, and that's the picture that's on the cover. And I wanted to be a different girl, and of course I stopped fighting, stopped doing drugs, LSD and sniffing glue. They call it huffing these days. I wish I wouldn't have done that now. My memory would be a lot better, I'm sure. So, yeah, little regrets there. But we moved here, and it wasn't, I ended up spiraling with grief and, trauma that I had never worked through and that I never got help for. And I ended up drinking and using. And then I stopped when I got very, very ill. I turned yellow, and my eyes turned yellow, and my skin turned yellow. It was either hepatitis or alcoholic hepatitis, probably from binge drinking. And I quit, and I had to, or I was so sick I couldn't drink. And that was about when I started searching for my biological mother. And I was in a relationship. We had a little bit of money because we had our own business, and I read the book Search for Anna Fisher, which was written by Florence Fisher. And that was the early stages of ALMA, Adoptee Liberty Movement Association. And I went to listen to Florence Fisher speak, and built a search finder. And I had people give me ideas of what to do. And I wrote, I don't know how many letters. They're all in this binder. I even wrote Pierre Trudeau asking to unseal my birth certificate. But I did find, and I found my uncle first, and I talked to him on the phone, and I found out that my mother died. I didn't get to meet her. And I was excited because I had other family, because I wanted connection so badly, because our family was my mom, my brother, my dad, and nobody came over. Nobody wanted to hang out at our house. It was dark. It was unwelcoming. They weren't warm. It was just, right? And I always wanted lots of, open door policy, and that's how I raised my kids. And so anyway, I found my biological family is up in Canada, and I'm Indigenous. And I have Indigenous on both sides of my family, settled around a lake up in Alberta. And I'm Cree. And so about a third Cree. And I looked Indigenous when I was younger. Now I have dark roots, but blonde hair now. So, and I'd always really felt something, about the, Native American culture when I was a kid in Alaska, but I just figured it was because it was cool at the time, but there definitely was more to that. So I was of the baby scoop area. They called it the 60s scoop in Canada because they would take these babies out of Indigenous homes and put them in white homes. So they were trying to get rid of the Indians. And
right. There was a documentary that was done by another adoptee up in Canada. I'll send you the information after, but it's very well done, and it talks about that exact era and like the time period of all these children that got put in different homes and they never knew their families, and they finally reunited years later, and how Canada is kind of apologizing in some ways. It's very well done. I'll send you the information, but you just reminded me of it.
I think it's called Truth and Reconciliation. I don't know an awful lot about it because I'm here, but I think in the 90s they, the atrocities that happened became well known, and the government was making amends. Yeah. And one of the things that they did, the Pope came to speak to the Indigenous people and apologize for the residential schools. And what's crazy is the property that he came to is where they have the pilgrimage. It's about 30,000 Indigenous people go to this lake because of the healing waters. And my birth father's property where they settled is right next to it. So they have a concession stand for all those attendees. And that's where the Pope came.
Oh, wow.
And it was on my 65th birthday, which was like July before last. And I normally would have been there, because it's always on my birthday, this 3-day event. But my daughter threw me a big party, and I was watching it on TV. I'm like, there's my brother's there's the house, there's, so yeah, I would definitely love to have that. So anyway, I eventually got sober after I found my biological family, made a number of trips, and I got sober at 26. And so my 40th sobriety milestone is this week. Clean and sober for 40 years. I ate my way through the book, but I didn't
amazing.
drink or use. And I had some drinking dreams through some of the writing, but I just ate more than normal. Yeah, hence the extra weight. But, you got to do what you got to do. And so...
Hey, I mean, it's better than better than the
for
alternative.
Sure.
So,
and so I fast forward 1991. My daughter was going to be 18. I counted the days until she was 18, and I couldn't wait. 6 months early, I called the adoption agency in Alaska, and they said, "Well, write us a letter, and we'll forward it to her parents, but wait till she's 18." So I had 6 more months to wait, and the adoptions were open in Alaska in 91. Pretty much. So anyway, a few days later, a week later or so, I get a phone call at my desk at work, and they say, "We're really sorry. It's Adoption Agency Catholic Charities, but we have a picture here." I'm like, "A picture? Well, who?" Like, I expect them to call me. They said, "Of your daughter." She had called within a few days or a week or so of my phone call 6 months early. And she couldn't wait either. And I knew she wouldn't. I knew she wanted to know me just like I wanted to know her. And so she's a spitting image of me. She flew here for her 18th birthday, and I had a party, and she looks like me, walks like me, talks like me. I mean, when we first talked on the phone, it was insane because she didn't have to ask me any questions because I told her everything that I would have wanted to know from my mom. Like everything. Like she didn't have to ask anything, right?
I guess that's the cool part of knowing both sides of like the coin. You see the adoptee point of view, you see the birth parent point of view, you get to fill in the gaps.
So anyway, she's now has 2 children, and one's in college in Michigan. That's where she lives. And the other one's 14, and they're lovely, lovely girls. And then I have a daughter now that's 39 and a grandson who's almost 8. My brother, who I, was so jealous of growing up, and he lives with me now. He's my roommate after my mom passed, and he's doing very well. We've mended our relationship, It was pretty dark there. He had a meth addiction for 15 years, and he's been clean for 6. So, he's grown up. There's a lot of codependency that I escaped. And, the thing that's so interesting about having trauma, and I had a good share of it. In 2020, I went through EMDR with a therapist over Zoom. And I've never suffered with anxiety, thank goodness, or really depression. I've been a little depressed the last couple of days. I think it's situational. It's like letting go, of this book and all this stuff, and people that I need to let go of. But I don't feel regrets anymore. Like I have this full circle gratitude, and it's not, it sounds really weird, but you'd have to experience it. It's like all that bad stuff that happened. If it didn't happen, it wouldn't make me, this person that, I almost quit writing my memoir, in 2016 when I was going through some really dark parts of it. And I was getting so many, people were commenting on the blog posts that I was writing these essays as I went. And they were telling me, and emailing me really private things. And I realized that, it's just like in grief group. They tell you if you're in grief, you're better off in group grief. That's why this adoptee things are so good, where we can hear other people's stories. And so I just kept writing because I knew it was going to help others. And I don't have regrets about any of that. The EMDR, was very interesting. With the therapist, we identified 11 big T traumas. So big T are big things like rape, relinquishment, and other things. I had 11 of them, and many small tree traumas that I didn't even name because they're just part of life, gaslighting, all kinds of stuff, secrets. But, I survived. I survived it all. And anybody can survive. We can all survive and thrive. Just because we have this stuff that happens, to us, it doesn't mean we can't heal and thrive through it and help others, because I think that's the way where I have had the most growth in my healing is helping others, and you're doing the podcast, which is helping others, which helps you too.
Yeah.
So
it's been amazing. I mean, the stories that I've heard in the last year alone, I mean, it's just, it's very opening. It's eye opening. Every time I talk to someone, it's a brand new story and a brand new window into their life that they lived in. It's like, wow, it's incredible, because it shows, your average human being really, goes through life in their own way, and each person has their own struggle, and everyone deals with it differently. And just to be able to be aware of certain things that other adoptees feel, it always is a time for self-reflection. After I interview someone, I kind of, at the end, I just sit there and kind of think for a little bit. I'm like, wow. And then I kind of think about my story and if it relates in some way, and then make that connection. And it's fascinating to me, because I think this is a really good healing process for a lot of people. I know you said, when we first started chatting, when we jumped on, you mentioned, that, at the time there was not a lot of resources for adoptees in the last 60 years. And, I couldn't even imagine what to do if I was, in the 70s or 80s or 90s, and I just found my birth family, and, Google wasn't really a thing yet. And it's just like, well, what do you do? Do you go on Yellow Pages and put an ad in and say, adoptees, call this number? I don't even know where to begin. And I mean, it's just incredible, honestly. Just to be able to listen to people. And, I think one of the big, most fascinating things for me is, out here in New Hampshire, there's a gentleman named Greg Gentry. You probably heard of him.
He's reading my memoir right now and texting me. Oh my God.
Yeah, he's such a great guy, and he organizes these meetups over in New Hampshire and Massachusetts every single month, every few weeks. He hosts it, and he always hosts it on the days that I'm busy, unfortunately. But I told him I'm determined to come to one of them, so hopefully I'll do. And he has one in an upcoming week, I think, or two. But I mean, the fact that when you go to these events, and I've been to conferences in the past, and you meet, adult adoptees or even older, and it's just they are very, they are in the same boat as you, except they're starting off thinking about adoption at an older age. And to see that, it's just wow, I don't know how they had the strength to go through it all these years and not talk about it with anyone. And now all of a sudden they're opening up, they're writing books. They're it's okay to now talk about it, because everyone else is now, all the younger generation is talking about it now. So I guess we can talk about it now because it's accepted. And I think that's just amazing, because if you get a little bit of peace at the end, I think that's what would make a world's difference, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah, we didn't talk about it. And there's, in 2018, I think it was, I had gone to Alaska a number of times, researching court records and doing all these different things, and going back to these places. And I had gone back to the adoption agency where I relinquished. And because I had this experience and talked to them there, an adoptive mother from Catholic Charities reached out to me and asked me if I'd help with a birth mother writing workshop. and she was having trouble finding birth mothers to write. I'm like, oh, really? I'm not surprised. Birth mothers don't want to talk about it. They don't want anybody to know about it. They don't want to think about it. The last thing they want to do is write about it. Because the grief and the pain of being a birth mother and the shame, and, it was like we were wired differently than, society wired us differently. It forever changed how we saw the world and how we saw ourselves. And so I have such compassion for these birth mothers that are such a mess, or they, have secondary rejection. And that wasn't my situation, but I understand why they do and why they're a shit show, right? And some are, some aren't, but some are, because they have gone through so much trauma. They've lost a child, okay, that it's a disenfranchised grief, which is what you were just discussing. That is disenfranchised grief. There's nobody brings a casserole to their door. There's no funeral for their baby. They don't get a death certificate. Nobody says, I'm so sorry. They don't go to counseling. They just are expected to move on with their life like it never happened. And we're not telling anybody because we're ashamed of you. And so they're supposed to navigate that on their own. And sometimes it's so painful that they can't access it. And that's, I think, what the secondary rejection is. And then they never told their family. They never told their husband, and then it's going to rip their whole world apart that they've built this glass castle around themselves. Right. And it's
right.
It's so, so sad for the adoptee. God, I mean, because all we want to do is know, why did you give me up? What happened? What do you look like? Do I have siblings? Can I talk to them? It's such a mess. And, things were different back then. Now we have open adoption, which is another mess because most of those end up closed, because it's up to the adoptive parents. But, I really believe that the healing comes in the compassion, because everybody's suffering. And we can judge those birth mothers till the cows come home. And we do. But we didn't live their life. We didn't have their experiences.
Right.
We didn't have their trauma. We didn't have their shame. We had our own, So, man, adoption's complex. And like you said when we were talking before we started, society still thinks it's wonderful. That's the narrative in society. And parts of it are. You got a wonderful mom. You got a wonderful mom. You really did. I got a wonderful mom. I did. I love my mom. She did the best she could. I wrote the truth of what I uncovered in my memoir. And even then, I felt like I was betraying her.
It's funny you say that, because whenever I share my story, I talk about my, adoptive parents, of course, and I always make sure that I, put them in a positive standpoint, because they did a great job. And I feel like I've lived relatively a pretty easy life. I've listened to, like I said, a lot of adoptees and stories, and it seems like I had it pretty easy compared to some others, which, I feel bad because I'm trying to connect and relate some experiences. And it's just like, wow, like, I can't believe, like, what do you mean your adoptive parents didn't love you, or like didn't want to? I've heard terrible stories that just make me so angry, of like people that go through the process of adopting a child and then they don't even like care for them. It's just like, what? Like, I mean, I just don't get it. But, I brought my mom on to interview on my podcast, and we have an episode together. It's like an hour and a half long, and we just go through from start to the end. And I wanted that for my own record, and just it was really, really cool to hear, even though I've heard the story a million times, and I got to go back to Russia with her and sit on the train, go back to my city, see the orphanage that she picked me up from, it was just a crazy ride. And like, just to be able to talk to her about it and understand kind of where she was. And, when we were there was one experience that I'll never forget. And it was, we were sitting in one of the Russian flats in my cousin's mother's whatever flat, and all the Russian family was there, and I was in a chair, and my mom was in a chair next to me, and my entire Russian family was sitting in front. And the grandmother, the one that cared for me in the hospital when I was born, she said that she had a question for my mom, for Cheryl, and she said, "Why did you adopt him?" And I looked at my mom and I'm just like, "Good luck." And she said, she's like, we were matched with the child, and we were matched with David, and ever since we were matched and saw a picture of him, that was it. It felt like it was right, and trying to convince a woman who grew up in the Soviet Union and who the Russians have this picture where if you're adopted by Americans, you're abused, your limbs are sold on the black market. Really, really dark stuff, because that's what the government in Russia tells them. So they thought that I was going to be like dead, pretty much. Like, oh, he's gone. He's adopted to America. We'll never see him again. But the fact that I went back there and I was healthy and I was like educated and like I was sitting there in front of them, they were amazed. But I'll never forget the look on my mom's face, because she had to sit there and kind of think for a little bit. Why him though? Like, why did you adopt him specifically? Like, why is he special? And my mom just had to think about that. And, it puts it in perspective, because it's like every day as an adoptee, maybe I'm not speaking for all adoptees. I'm speaking personally. Like, I don't wake up every day and remind myself I'm adopted, I'm going to do things differently, or I'm adopted, I'm special. I don't think that. When I was, I just wake up and think, oh, normal day, I am who I am. My mom is my mom. My dad's my dad. I don't think twice about it. But coincidentally, today, as we're interviewing right now, it's actually my birth mom's birthday. I reached out and said, happy birthday. She didn't answer, not surprised. But I mean, I honestly, I didn't even know it was her birthday until my iPhone told me this morning. So it's kind of like, it's just we experience so many different, I don't even know what to even say. Like, just so many different experiences, different feelings and emotions all the time. And I think people are quick to judge and say, oh, it's because you're adopted, you're experiencing that, poor you. It's just like, I'm not asking for pity. I'm not asking for this, I don't go around asking for that. But, it's just, like you said, adoption is complicated, and that's why we're here talking about it. So
it sure is. Yeah. When I was little, my brother and I, we'd tell kids we were adopted because it was cool.
Yeah, everyone thought that it was the coolest thing. Yeah, I didn't care much at all, but as soon as people knew I was from Russia, that stuck with me for my entire life.
I was from Canada. Yeah. I mean, it was so weird. My mom and dad, they got a note that they could go get their baby, in Canada. So they had my brother, and they went to get him, and they saw him in the hospital, and he was a lovely little baby, fairly new. And they went back to their hotel room, and they were going to, pick him up the next day. And my mom woke up from her nap and said, I don't feel right. I can't take this baby. She was ready to go home, and she just had this sense about her that it was wrong. And so they went back to the social worker, and they said, we're so sorry, but he's a beautiful baby. I don't know what it is. I just can't. And they said, well, why don't we go look at this other baby? They got my brother. That was the baby they were supposed to have. Maybe,
Wow. Yeah.
So who knows? We don't know. We don't know anything. We think we we might have ideas. We don't know how the universe works or why things happen to some people and they don't happen to others. Just, I was listening to you, and I think we all have our own individual destiny. This is what we're supposed to experience for whatever reason, and I'm just riding it out. I'm riding it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I do have a question for you that came to mind, and I think it's a particularly interesting question given that you are a birth mother and an adoptee, and I think a lot of adoptees would agree this is a common question that we have. When it's the birthday of a child you give up, how do you feel on that day?
Ever since I can remember, I would sit on her birthday and I would think about her just before we were reunited. And I'd think about her really hard. I remember going into a dark bathroom in our house. We had no windows. And I'd sit and I'd think about her, and I know that we could connect through the ethers, because she'd be thinking about me on the same day that I was thinking about her. And I did that with my birth mother as well, who was deceased. And she was deceased 8 years before I relinquished my baby. And then when I met my daughter, she told me, in fact, the first letters that we exchanged before we were reunited, that she would sit and wait for me to comfort her. And she would cry at the window waiting for me to comfort her. And so always on her birthday is a huge deal for me. Always has been. She never texts me on mine. And it doesn't matter to me. I mean, she's got a busy life. It's not a thing. I hope she does for her mom. I hope she does for her dad. In fact, something about her dad was having a birthday or was having a Father's Day or something. And I said, well, what are you doing for your dad? She goes, oh, nothing. He doesn't care. I'm like, oh, what do you mean he doesn't care? Oh, he doesn't care. I'm like, oh my God, she's 50. Okay. I mean, do what you're going to do, I guess, but you don't get a lot of time to make stuff up when they're getting in their 80s, so she got beautiful family. They flew her out. My mom, when I was reunited, and on my website, I have under the media tab, if anybody goes there, there's an interview with me and my birth father, because Alma, a 4-part series on adoption, they wanted to film somebody in a reunification. So they came out and met me and my dad, my birth father, at the airport, and then they interviewed me in my home. So you can see me at 23 and my birth father.
Oh, wow.
And it's scratchy. And then I have another video of my daughter and I'm pregnant with my son, who's your age. So it's 30 years ago. And she's, we're a few years into reunification. It was some really hokey cable show, and a local cable show, and it was staying for years. Anyway, I, pulled clips out, and you can see us. And, I talk about, I talk first and ad nauseum because I talk a lot. And then, she got to talk, and it's sweet. It's sweet. Yeah. So, and then I have another video that I haven't, it's when we reunited at the airport, and you can see, that's back when you could come down the tunnel and you could be waiting for them in the airport before 9/11 and before your birthday. And
thanks for the reminder.
No problem. Anyway, so that I'm going to probably put up here any day. And
it's those videos and memories that you're never going to forget. I didn't record, I'm kind of kicking myself a little bit. When I was in Russia, I didn't even record anything when I was there. I took photos only, just photos. And I tried to write daily of my trip. And I got as far as the day before. So we went to Moscow for a few days, and then we went to my home city where my family was. And I wrote all the way up to just about leaving for my home city. And then I just stopped. I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I'm on overload right now. Like, I mean, it was too much at the time, but I mean, I had, it was about as Hollywood like as you could picture it. I stepped off the train and my entire family surprised me at the train station in my city. And, I ran to them, they ran to me, crying, kissing. I mean, it was like, yeah, it was amazing. I mean, so we had a driver and translator there waiting for us, and they didn't have any idea that my family was going to show up, and I had no idea that my family was going to show up. But I totally forgot that I, told one of my cousins previously what time I was showing up at the train station. So they must have told the entire
Wow.
family. Um, we get there, and then I get thrown into one car. My mom gets thrown into another car, and she has no idea where I'm going. I have no idea where she's going, and I'm in the back seat with my grandparents and this Russian girl, and no one speaks English. My Russian was okay, not the best, but I got by a little bit, and there were no seatbelts. He didn't care about laws, didn't care about speeding. I mean, it was about as crazy as you could think of. We're in the middle of nowhere, and we're driving, and my grandfather has his knee on the steering wheel. He's trying to light a cigarette. There's Russian music blasting. My grandmother is turned around facing me, just smiling at me. And this Russian girl next to me is one of our guides, and her name was Dasha, and she spoke English, and she just was very straight-faced the whole time. I don't know how she kept her composure, because I turned and I'm just like, it's just me, or if this is crazy. Makes what is going on? And she just looked at me with a stern face and said, Russia. So it was kind of an ongoing joke at that point. Whatever happened, whatever, Russia, who cares? But yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy, and documenting that. But the fact that we are able to remember that and have photos, and you have all the videos, which is awesome. That's just, that's stuff that you can't make that up, and it's real. And I think the fact that we have that such emotional piece of our lives that we get to archive is incredible, because we get to pass that on to family and show them, hey, this is who I was. This is where you come from, and that's really important for adoptees. I know a lot of them, we itch to know answers about things that we probably will never get the full answer entirely. For example, every time I asked my birth mom about what happened, it was always kind of a different story each time. So it's what, and who do you really believe? Because then her sister says something, then the grandmother says something, and then it's okay, the birth father says something, she's crazy. I'm okay. But, I mean, and that's, I will say, I think from an adoptee to an adoptee, it's hard because, like we said, we want to know the answers. And that's something that we desperately seek. And the fact that we try so hard to know, I feel in some ways that gives us not a fair advantage when it comes to when we're dealing with just your everyday people and relationships and trusting people and being open to people, because we don't want to be abandoned again. We don't want to feel like we're not, chosen, or we just don't want more trauma. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day, and that's why talking about it is always the good first step. And that's why we can have these conversations. And it's so important to continue these conversations.
Absolutely. I when I found my biological family and my father came to visit me, I remember I was in the honeymoon stage, and I remember feeling so excited. And, my mother had encouraged me to search. And then when she wasn't happy, angry at me because I sent a Father's Day and a birthday card on his, which was right at Father's Day. And I was just excited. And, my uncle had said, thank your mother. She did such a great job because, I was articulate and, all those things that we get, and by having a better home. And she was so angry, and, how dare they? As if I'm just a caretaker. And then she filled up her journal with 13 pages of anger. And I'd forgotten the things she was saying. And I just thought, oh, Mom, you're my mom. You're my mom. Why? I don't understand. And I was very self-centered and, young. But when she gave me her journals, and I had while I was writing, she knew I was writing my memoir, and then she passed, and I'm reading the stuff that she wrote, that she wouldn't have adopted me had she known that I was going to go. There were some hard things to hear. And I don't know. I know that there's a narrative out there that some adoptive parents are filling a hole, and I think,
Right.
everybody fills holes with babies. Well, we'll fix our marriage and we'll have a baby. But I think, that will fix everything.
Good luck, Doc.
But, and when we don't, or when we don't look like them, and that, I could never be her biological child. I was never going to be like her.
Yeah.
And I couldn't fix that for her. So it's a quagmire. That's for sure. But anyway, do you have any other questions?
If I have one big question that I always like to end interviews with, it's always a chance for you to reflect and give your wisdom to all of us. If you had a piece of advice to give to our listeners, what would it be?
I would definitely suggest compassion. If there's a way that you can get towards that compassion. For me, I had to look at my parents' past, my adoptive parents' past, my birth parents' past. I had to understand what made them do the things they did. And rather than blame, I do understand why they did the things they do.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'd like to say that I'd have done better. In fact, I have done better. I have not abused my children. I've never beaten my children with a wire hanger. I've never molested anybody. I was an alcoholic, but, I beat people up when I was a kid, but I didn't do some of those horrible things and it can stop with us. We can do the work.
Right.
We can do the work. And there's work to be done. This is a part of it. There's group, there's coaching, there's lots of all kinds of things that one can do now that is, there's all kinds of books coming out about healing. It's just fantastic that we have these tools now that we didn't have.
Yeah.
And we didn't have them when I was younger, but I wasn't ready. I think I was in the fog for quite some time. And I came out of it while I was writing. I'm like, what?
Yeah. I feel like everyone who's adopted, they're going to go at their own pace with discovery, with self, identity, with, whether it was traumatic or not, and they may not have known it was deep down inside. Maybe, years later, they may figure it out. And when it's their time, they're going to know. I mean, growing up, I never, I always knew I was adopted, but I didn't actively really seek to know anything more. I just knew I had, oh yeah, you were from Russia. It was a thing. And I didn't even feel the need to even do a search. I just didn't, not that I didn't care, but it was never important, I guess, which is kind of odd to say now after all this work I've done with adoption in the last couple of 10 years. But it wasn't until I was 18. And it's not because, my parents denied access or anything. I had access to all my files. They were very open about it. Anytime I wanted to ask questions, they were there for me. I just, again, didn't show interest until I was 18 for whatever reason. But when I was 18, one of my friends asked me one day, hey, David, have you ever thought about the fact that you actually have a person, have you ever thought that you have a whole family in Russia and a mother in Russia? And they probably think about you sometimes on your birthday. And they said on your birthday. And I'm like, whoa. That was just wow, you're right. Ooh. And I'm like, it was senior year. I was pretty much done with classes, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing much. I'm just waiting until I go to college at this point. So let's see what I can find for fun. It was all just starting for fun, but oh boy, a little bit of curiosity turns into a whole different realm of the things. But it's just, it's incredible that everyone has a story, and even if you're not adopted, you still have a story, right? It's just that our story is a bit more complex, in my opinion, because you're not dealing with one family, you're dealing with multiple families, and you're dealing with multiple layers of who you are, because some people identify as who they were when they were born, others identify more of who they are now. And to fill in those gaps and it makes it especially hard when you have birth parents who tell you that, oh, I'm going to call you by your birth name because you're my son. And it's just like, it's just an odd, it's just these different scenarios we have to like work with that if you're not adopted, you don't understand. And I think when it comes down to at the end of the day, it's why we have conferences. It's why we have meetups. It's why we want to bring people together and have podcasts, write books, and have the awareness factor, because we get it. And it's really hard to talk to people who don't. And, because you can complain all you want about, oh, my birth mother said this. And you're talking to someone who's not adopted. They're going to look at you and be like, that sucks. Like, it's like, that's it. That's all you have to say. Yeah. So but
that's the problem.
Anyway,
that's
compassion.
The problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that they have never felt what it feels like to not have identity, because you've always had, my friends, America, most people, they've always had cousins and aunts and uncles. And they just took it for granted. When you're your only relative, they can never feel that. They can never feel that.
Yeah.
That's what makes this so difficult, because there's no compassion, because they've never felt it.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're not gonna. They don't, to put it like bluntly, basically, if you get a photo of your birth mother for the first time, it's going to change your life. And if someone who's not adopted, they're like, I have a million photos of my mom. Who cares? Like, just that black and white right there. It's just like, the fact, like, I remember, I ask every adoptee, like, when did you do a search? Do you remember when you found out or get answers about things? They know the day, they know the time. They pretty much know exactly what they were doing in that second. And I remember, it was 2:15 to 2:30 in the morning. I was up and I got an email from this gentleman who did my search in Russia, and he attached photos, and it said, we saw your grandparents and more information to come. Here's a photo of your grandmother and mother. And I was sitting there at 2:30 in the morning, and I was just like, oh my God, because for the first time I got to see a photo of, this person has my smile. This person has my eyes. This person, like, it's like life changing. And, little things go a long way when you're adopted. Any bit of information is like amazing for us. Like, just to know even like what your birth mother's hair color was, it was a big deal. I mean, we really like, I feel like as adoptees, we're not asking for a lot here. Okay. We're asking for like bare minimum sometimes. And it's people, if you're not adopted, you don't get it, unfortunately. But that's why, we're also here to educate people who are not adopted of things that we struggle with, so they know that. So society understands, and, at the end of the day, shows more compassion, like you said. That's what we need, and that's what we want. And I think that's what.
There. I mean, now we have social media, and we have media, and we have things that we didn't have for years. And we have, younger people that have louder voices, and having closed records is just mind-boggling to me. But
I don't get that either. That's a
wow. Wow.
If only I was born in the United States, I swear I'd run for president, and I would sign an executive order day one. Adoption records all open, no closed. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't be president either. I was born in Canada. Don't think about it.
So
I had a natural.
Do you have dual citizenship? Do you? Yeah. Nice.
Because I
didn't
make the decision to be relinquished. I mean, to be,
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Well, Monica, there's a great conversation. I'm sure we're going to have more. I promise it won't be another 6 months. If there's anything that pops up, let me know. You can come back on and chat. I definitely want to read your book. We're going to attach it in the description, and we're going to put your website on there too for everyone to go and buy your book. And
that sounds good.
Get to know you, and it was just amazing. So thank you so much for your time. It means a lot, and for your patience and everything. And your story is remarkable.
It's a great interview.
You're doing awesome, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you and chat more. That was Monica Hall, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in with us here at Voice of Adoptees. You can find her episode on all of our platforms. If you are adopted or know someone who is, send them our way, www.voiceofadoptees.com. It's been a pleasure speaking with you again, and we hope to see you again soon. Remember, Voice of Adoptees, who am I?
Thanks for listening to Voice of Adoptees. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. See you next time.